My name is Karishma. I am head of training and behavior at Calm Canine Academy. I've been working now with complex behavior concerns, especially in intense urban environments, for almost 7 years. And I spent 5 of those years working in Manhattan in New York, in America, which is obviously a very intense environment, and we experience a lot of problems with walking our dogs in those environments. Now I work and I'm based in London, UK. I'm a bit of a nerd, so as many dog trainers, we're all trying to accrue as much knowledge as possible. So you can see some of my certifications here, and I really do work now exclusively with complex anxiety conditions or sort of emotional dysregulation with dogs now all over the world, and we work primarily virtually. My team, Calm Canine Academy, or CCA, we are a team of digital dog training and behavior consultants. We work with clients in over 14 countries around the world, and we all specialize in different kind of areas of dog behavior and training. You can see some of our collective qualifications underneath. Today, we're obviously really going to be focusing in on walking our dogs, especially sensitive dogs in the urban or in chaotic environments. That's really where we're going to be zoning in on for today's talk. We're going to go through a little presentation and then we'll take some questions at the end, but I might ask some prompts in the chat box. So if anybody at any point wants to come and sort of communicate, interact with me, there will be points where I will be asking you some questions because I want to hear about your experiences and your challenges as we go through. And so without further ado, I think we'll just dive straight in and I'll show you what we've got up over the next 40 minutes or so. This talk really centers around management on walks, managed walking. And I'm going to start off by talking about exactly what that is for many folks. So we'll go through that, what it is, who needs it, and we'll call that section Managed Walking 101. We'll then talk about equipment. What will you need to be able to walk your dog in this way? And then we're going to talk about active and passive management. So specific actionable things that you can be doing with your dog straight away off the back of this webinar to start hopefully seeing some improvements and kind of go out in the world with a little bit more confidence with your dogs. So that's what it looks like over the next 40 minutes. If you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat as we go through, and I'll be addressing them mostly at the end. So everyone ready to rock and roll? Let's go. I'm going to dive straight in and I'm going to start talking a little bit about Managed Walking 101. And I'd be interested in hearing if anyone's even heard of this phrase, managed walking, or management in general. And I think I want to get you acquainted with this. So management in general refers to things that we do to help our animals with the behavioral problems that they're experiencing right now. Managed walking is, specifically applying that to the walking behavior, going on walks with your dog, usually around your neighborhood. And there are really 2 main goals from managed walking. My first goal here is to minimize their exposure to triggers. Now, by triggers, I mean stimulus they cannot handle, things that they struggle with. And I actually be really interested in anyone who's around and interested in telling me in the chat what triggers your dog struggles with. Maybe it's people, dogs, bikes, vehicles, statues, whatever it is, skateboards. The goal of managed walking is to identify what the triggers are for your dog and then to minimize their exposure to those triggers. By minimizing exposure to those triggers, you will minimize the rehearsal of unwanted behaviors and minimize their stress levels, because as many of you I'm sure have experienced, when your dogs are exposed to triggers, they can get really stressed. And I'm looking in the chat now, I'm seeing dogs is a really big one, so commonly the case. Motorcycles, skateboards, squirrels in capital letters, absolutely something that my young staffy puppy struggles with, rats, fast moving objects. I'm hoping that people who are watching this kind of maybe this resonates with some people. Lots of dogs have very similar triggers. That's because, there are a few things like dogs, people who are running or moving strangely, children, wheeled objects. These things are commonly quite challenging for our canine companions. So our first goal is to identify what their triggers are, and then we have to minimize their exposure to the triggers. Many people come to me at this point and say, wait, if we're minimizing their exposure, how are they ever going to get better? Now, management is only one part of a behavior plan, but it is an absolutely necessary part. And for some folks, it can actually be quite challenging, which is why I want to dedicate so much time to talking about it. Think about it this way, your dogs have a habit. Whatever their habit is, we need to change that habit. And that habit is not going to be changed if they repeatedly rehearse the unwanted behavioral or emotional response to their triggers. If your dogs are really scared of other dogs and they go out on multiple walks a day and they are lunging and barking 20 plus times a day, it is going to be really hard to change their behavioral response because they're rehearsing it over and over again. And things that are rehearsed get strengthened. They are learning over and over again that their emotional and behavioral response is appropriate because they end the walk and they survived, right? So our big first step, before we even think about training, before we even touch training really around those triggers, is to get our management really, really good. We want to be able to minimize their exposure, minimize their rehearsal of unwanted behaviors, and minimize their overall stress levels. The goal, a kind of secondary goal that I like to clarify is, through doing this, our dogs are not going to worry about their triggers as much as they were before. It's not about getting our dogs to walk close by their triggers without reacting. And that is a mistake that I have made in the past myself. The goal is actually that the dog does not have to think about or worry about their triggers at all, because we cannot train all the time. We cannot train on every walk. We can train in certain specific training sessions, but if you're walking your dog 4 times a day to use the bathroom, if you don't have a yard space, you cannot train 4 times a day. You can't. Imagine going to therapy 4 times a day. You'd be like, oh my God, get me out of here. I cannot talk about this anymore, right? There are times where we need to just get stuff done. Maybe you need to use the bathroom. Maybe you need to get from point A to point B, get from your apartment to your car, whatever it is, get from your apartment to the park. Get through a really busy part of town. The goal is not to train on these managed walks. The goal is to get from point A to point B, get what we need to get done, and have minimal bad experiences. Oh, thank you, Hira. It's okay. That's my dog. He's like, poof, there's someone outside. Yeah, so George is here in the chat saying getting from the house, like out of your apartment, down through the building and out into the lobby. Like, these are exact examples of moments where we might just want to be helping our dog through that experience. We don't want to be actively training. We want to be just getting them through it, right? I cannot stress how necessary management is. Without management, we will not change behavior. And one of the biggest mistakes I see with people working on walking behaviors is a lack of management. An example of this might be a client who's in central Manhattan or Brooklyn who is doing 5 training sessions a week with the helper dogs and helper people, trying to get the dog to behave a different way around those triggers. However, the dog is reacting 10 times a day on every potty walk, or they're going for long walks around the neighborhood and the dog is reacting, 10, 20 times at a variety of triggers. Of course, if that dog is reacting 10, 20 times a day, think about it like money going in that bank account. That bank account's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You could try filling a separate bank account for a different set of behaviors. However, it will never overtake the unwanted behavior bank account because we're consistently depositing in it. Hopefully that analogy made sense. And what we need to be doing is stopping the investment in the unwanted behavior, so that when we do start doing training, it really counts, it really matters. The dog is able to learn something new because they've stopped rehearsing old patterns that are maladaptive. So often at the end of this little section, or when I talk about this with folks, there are some questions. The first question is, wait a second, should I be always walking my dog in a defensive way? Should they always be managing my dog on walks? The answer is ideally no. Ideally, we are able to give our dogs enrichment walks, fun walks, pleasure walks, right? That are for fun. Maybe those are in a natural environment. We'll talk more about this later. But if you live in central London, Manhattan, Boston, LA, right? The chances are you might live in quite a hectic, chaotic and urban environment. And in those scenarios, it might be that all of your walks are managed just around the neighborhood until you can get to a safer place where they can then have a little bit more freedom. You can have a little bit more freedom and you can both decompress a little bit more. And I do have to say that I do believe that our dogs have a need for exploration, for choice, for being not managed. You know, you can't manage 24/7, they need freedom. But I'm talking specifically here about scenarios where they can't handle that freedom because there are too many triggers, because the environment is too chaotic, and because they haven't had the requisite skill set yet. In which case, you know, I know many dogs whose, you know, 80% of their walks are quite heavily managed, and they get this 20% of the time where they're in a secure location where there are no triggers, or on a hike in the countryside where they have more, where they're able to give them more freedom and they're able to make appropriate choices. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that, yes, we will be talking about a kind of walk today that is quite intensely managed. We're micromanaging their environment quite intensely. We're not giving them a huge amount of freedom. And that is likely because in your environment, they are unable to make the correct choices, the choices that will keep them safe, the choices that are adaptive and healthy. But we cannot really keep these animals who have a need for exploration and manage every single walk that they have. They need to be given outlets for freedom and decompression, but that's really a lesson for another day. So I've talked a little bit about what it is. I guess the next question is, who is this going to be appropriate for? And I know a lot of folks who are here today and likely who are watching this webinar have dogs who are maybe reactive, overreactive to certain stimulus, and that makes walking really challenging. So maybe dogs that are excessively fearful, lungy, barky behaviors, maybe growly, snappy behaviors. Maybe we're seeing dogs that were recently fostered, or sick or injured dogs who are really going through something and are having big feelings, right? So that often tends to be folks who are kind of interested in this topic. However, this is also really useful for puppies. Adolescent dogs who often go through sensitive periods where they can be a little bit more sensitive to certain stimulus, hypersocial, easily frustrated dogs, and really any dog in a chaotic urban environment. Anyone who's done any research into dog body language, they often, when I talk to folks who've started learning about this, they walk around their city and they go, oh my gosh, there are so many stressed dogs everywhere. And once you learn and start to see it, it's really hard to not see it all around you. Our dogs often don't cope very well with chaotic urban environments, with shopping districts, with busy high streets. And that's just because they were not designed to live in under these conditions, especially if we have some of the breeds that are quite popular these days, like herding breeds, hunting dogs, terriers, etc. So I personally believe that there are the percentage of dogs in our who live with us in our human world, the percentage of dogs who don't need managed walking is actually really small. I think the majority of dogs could benefit from their guardians having some of these skills, especially as a proactive with a proactive approach, so that we can ensure problems don't pop up down the line. But if you do already have a dog that's performing unwanted lungy, barky behaviors, maybe seeing any of these behaviors, pulling, overexcitement, hypersocial, just I got here, puppy madness, you know, just a puppy who wants to pull towards everything and sniff everything. That's really what those are the people for whom managed walking is necessary. And I'm really excited to talk about some actionable steps today that we can be going into to start maybe managing your dog on walks a little bit better. I'm going to pause here for a quick second, just to double down on a point that maybe I haven't made enough in that last section, which is that, you know, managed walking is just the start. Once we get our management in place, we tend to see a real improvement in behavior just off the back of management itself. However, there is a whole other section, there are multiple other sections to a behavior change plan for any of these behaviors. I'm not going to talk about them at all. I'm not even going to touch them because today we're really focusing on the management, but I'm hoping that if you put some of these things in place, you'll start to see improvements just off the back of your dogs being triggered less on a daily basis. But make sure that you are working with a professional and maybe pursue other educational outlets that will talk more about behavior modification, behavior therapy, amongst other components. So I just wanted to quickly press that point before we go into some of the things that you might be doing, buying or acquiring or putting in place to see improvement. So let's talk about what you'll need. You'll see my extremely fashionable photo here of me with my adolescent Staffordshire Bull Terrier puppy. His name is Ash. He is 8.5 months old, almost 9 months now. And he is a working dog. He's a sport line Staffordshire Bull Terrier, which means he was bred to do sports. Now that means that he is extremely social with people. He is extremely interested in prey. He wants to run and say hi to every single dog. And if people get too close to him at the beginning, it would be quite uncontrollable. I used to have to really manage him very heavily, and I still manage him to this day quite intensely, I have to say. And we put all our kit on to show you what necessary equipment might look like. And what I have some options here. So I have necessary equipment and then optional equipment. So let me go through this a little bit. If anyone is looking down this list and going, oh, I would love some more recommendations, the Calm Canine Academy Instagram, if you go through our Instagram, in the link in our bio, we have an affiliate store with lots of this stuff, recommendations there. So you can click through our Instagram and have a little look. You can always DM us as well if you want specific recommendations, and we can help out. And I'm going to talk you through what I think is negotiable and non-negotiable, right? So non-negotiables, we need a Y front harness. A Y front harness is a harness like you can see on Ash here. His is more of a T front, but the idea is that it doesn't restrict shoulder blade movement. So there's a piece that goes down the front of his chest and around his neck, which allows for almost full movement of his shoulder blades. These are the most comfortable harnesses. They're also going to give you a good amount of control because they're not going to be flapping about on his body. If I see a reactive dog in a loose, ill-fitting harness, I am very concerned because it's really easy for them to get out of those harnesses, right? So we want a well-fitting Y front harness. This particular one is the balance harness. Again, click through our Instagram to see if you want to, or just Google it to see some examples. One thing that Ash doesn't have on here is a martingale collar, but if you have a quick Google, you'll find one of those. These are non-slip collars that are not going to slip out. They're not going to slip out of, but they're also relatively ethical. They're minimally uncomfortable and very, very safe. And there are definitely some dogs, big dogs, for example, for whom I might not recommend a harness. I might say, you know what, you actually want to get a collar on this dog so that you have some more control. And there are some dogs who I will have both on, and I will have multiple leashes on, a clip on the harness, a clip on the collar. You'll see here it says 4 to 6 foot leash, 1 or 2. If you have a Jack Russell Terrier, likely you could get away with a harness and 1 leash on that harness because they're small dogs. If you have a bloodhound, a Newfoundland, a Great Dane, you might have all of this equipment. You might have a Y front harness and a martingale collar with 2 leashes, 1 on both, for maximum safety and maximum control, especially if your dog is very unpredictable. If you speak to us as your behavior consultants, we'd give you tailored advice, you know, to keep you safe, to give you the most control possible, especially if you're disabled or small like me, maybe doesn't have the best upper body strength or lower body strength, to be honest. Let's be real, for me anyway. I really rely on my intelligent equipment use to make sure that I have maximum control over my dogs and my clients' dogs. So we're talking about a harness, potentially a collar as well, 1 or 2 leashes that are short leashes, not retractable leashes, not long leashes, 4 to 6 foot leashes, so that you're not going to have to deal with too much slack. A tree pouch, obviously, as you can see, and I have some sprats, some dried fish in that treat pouch. You can see Ash is zoned in going, mom has treats. And those to me are non-negotiable. You need these things. Some optional pieces of equipment, depending on the severity of your dog's behavior. We could have distance increasing equipment. I actually have 2 pieces of distance increasing equipment on my dog here. I have a do not pet leash, and I also have a little bandana around his harness that says, give me space. So those are 2 pieces of distance increasing equipment. Now, I have to say they won't always be respected, but it's worth it. Why not? What will be respected likely is a muzzle. If people see a dog with a muzzle on, they will move away. And you can see my basket muzzle is attached to my treat pouch in case I want to whip it out and put it on my dog at any point. Our muzzles are always basket muzzles that go around the full snout, never a cloth muzzle that holds the mouth shut. I want it to be the biggest, scariest muzzle to get people to go away and give us space. And often, even with dogs that don't have a bite history, I will recommend the use of a muzzle just to get people to give you that extra space. Many folks are quite reluctant to put a lot of these management things in place because of the social stigma attached to this. And to them, I will empathize. Of course, I get it. It doesn't feel that great to have people look a little bit nervous about your dog, but to see behavior change, we need to give them the space that they need, right? And the best way to do that is to make them look as scary as possible. Put a big muzzle on them, and the chances of people crossing the road with their dogs goes up by 60–70% from my experience. Oh, fantastic. Miranda's got some links in the chat there, so definitely go have a look for the various links there. And yeah, definitely, I always say to folks, like, try to remove your the social stigma away from these pieces of equipment, because really with each additional tool, you get a higher chance of you being given the space that you need. If you live somewhere rural, maybe you don't need all of these things, but if you have a highly reactive dog and you live in Brooklyn, Manhattan, London, you definitely will need to go all out on as much as you can use to keep them safe and to keep you and the public safe. I have 2 other things here. Spray shield. Now, spray shield is a small can of a distance increasing spray. It's a citronella spray that sprays a very unpleasant smell in a sharp line in front of you. And I also have a pop-up umbrella written here. And some people are like, what? In case it rains? No, these 2 are deterrents. They're deterrents, especially if you are approached by off-leash, uncontrollable dogs, if you're approached by aggressive dogs. They are relatively safe and ethical ways to increase the distance between you and any oncoming uncontrollable dog. A pop-up umbrella, kind of like a squid that might make itself really big. You see it in the animal kingdom, right? Lizards that will pop up their neck or their throat to deter oncoming animals. I will often use pop-up umbrellas in small spaces. Believe it or not, we have many cases that come through our books where we have clients living in apartments with reactive and aggressive dogs where there is an off-leash dog problem, and they're quite frequently rushed by off-leash dogs that are out of control. Being prepared for whatever scenario you're going to be placed in is really important. And I always take my spray shield and my muzzle out with me, just in case I'm surprised, because you really don't know what's out there. I'm sure that that few folks have been in similar situations. Some folks are saying they've looked for spray shields and have been struggling to find it. I just ordered one off Amazon, so do have a little look there, and I did find one there. Alternatives, I don't know a legal alternative, so I'm not going to give you any more advice, but a citronella spray is really what you're looking for of some sort. So sometimes camping stores and wildlife gear outlets have these because they're often wildlife deterrents as well. I really find these extremely helpful. They help me feel calm and safe. And as you can see, there's like a scale. You could go all out, or you could be relatively chill about what you use. But honestly, to me, I really do counsel my clients to use as many of these as necessary, especially if you're in a very unpredictable environment that can be, you know, where you're getting rushed a lot by off-leash dogs. You know, you need to protect yourself and your dog first and foremost, whilst also maintaining an ethical standard of care to the animals in our community. So these are pieces of equipment. Just stop for a quick second to recognize how adorable Ash is. Very cute, thank you. Okay, we can move on now. And once you have all of your equipment in place, and you have the stuff that you need to keep you safe and to, oh, Miranda, what a fantastic option here. I'm just gonna back up really quickly to go into that. Miranda's giving me some great examples here in the chat. Someone asked about an alternative to, oh my goodness, sorry, my loves, 1 second. Here you go. Someone asked about an alternative to citronella spray. Miranda has just popped in to say, what about a pet corrector? So pet correctors are compressed air, and they make like a, you can also get air horns that make really loud noises. They can be really great, but one thing I would suggest is to practice with your dog beforehand with the umbrella as well, potentially if you have a very sensitive dog. The reason I like a spray shield is because it's directed outwards at the oncoming dogs and relatively doesn't really affect your dog as much. And I know some folks who are repeatedly having to use these deterrents, and I want to make sure that it doesn't negatively impact your dog in the process. So think about that when you're choosing your equipment. You know, you're always weighing up what's the safest, what's the most deterring, what's available. But that's just definitely something to consider. If you have a very sensitive dog, you might want to rehearse with them popping an umbrella up, or using your spray shield, or using your pet corrector, your compressed air, before you're actually in a scenario, because the last thing you want is to trigger your dog as well and then have multiple dogs that are freaking out to have to deal with. So it's never going to be perfect, but definitely something that to consider. All right. So we've had a lovely little chat about equipment. Hopefully you've got some ideas maybe of things that can be added to your arsenal to help you with management. And now I want to talk about specific actionable steps that you can take. And I split this into passive management and active management. And I have to credit Dr. Amy Cook for that distinction. She's an absolutely incredible dog trainer and behavior consultant who really focuses in on the importance of management when she teaches with her clients. And this distinction is really, really helpful. So when talking about passive management, I'm talking about things you can do almost before the walk or a step back from the walk to set yourself up for success. And the first thing here seems quite obvious, but is worth doubling down on. Keep your walks short, right? I'm talking especially about these dogs that are very reactive and stressed and fearful, or even dogs that are hypersocial and overexcited. They do not need to go on walks around your city, neighborhood, for you to be a good dog guardian. And I think it's really important someone with letters behind their name tells you that. I get this so frequently, you know, if you don't walk your dog, I felt bad about not walking my dog, so I kept taking them on long walks. For many of our dogs that struggle with behavior concerns and emotional dysregulation, walks can be taxing over tiring, right? There's a difference between coming home at the end of a long day at the beach with your friends, you feel exhausted, but you feel fulfilled. Compare that to coming back after a day of traveling for 12 hours on busy subways and airplanes and stuff like that. You feel tired after both of those days, but on one of those days, on the beach day, you feel comfortable, your nervous system is regulated. On the travel day, you feel stressed, irritable, exhausted, but not good, right? That's the distinction I make between taxed and tired and taxed. You do not need to take your dog on long walks through the urban environment around their triggers for them to be fulfilled. There are many other ways that you can meet their needs. Unfortunately, we're not going to be talking about that today, but I want you to know that as long as you're supplementing with other things that meet their needs, likely you don't need to go on many long walks. So quick potty breaks if necessary, because I know lots of folks who live in the urban environment don't have access to a backyard, right? So maybe you're just running out during off-peak times to give your dog a quick walk around the block or a quick potty break near you, near your house or your apartment. So keep walks short, walk during the non-busy times. One of the classic dog training books for reactive dogs is called like the Midnight Dog Walkers, which kind of harks to this idea that we'll be walking our dogs often at the times where there are less folks around. I think that being situationally aware is really, really important. And this can be quite stressful sometimes for humans. So I'm always counseling my guardians and my dog clients to try and keep calm whilst being aware of your surroundings. I want you to be proactively aware of future triggers, not reacting to triggers that surprise you. I want you to be walking around considering maybe someone will come out from that door. Maybe someone will pop out behind that blind spot. When you take your driving test in the UK, you do this thing called a hazard perception test. And it's a little video game that you play, and you're in a car and you have to point out to the instructor where the hazards might be coming from, right? We're thinking like this. We're thinking about hazard perception. Where might a dog come from? Might there be a dog coming around that corner on the end of a long 6-foot leash that could surprise you and your dogs? I want you to be thinking about the entrances and exits. If I had to move away from a trigger coming around that corner, where would I go? I'd cross the street, I'd turn around, I'd go into this side alley. So situational awareness whilst retaining emotional and nervous system regulation is key. So we want you to be aware but not anxious. I mean, you can be, the easiest way to do that is to just really try to be in places that set you up for success. I avoid busy streets, thin sidewalks. I never walk when the schools are coming out or kids are going into school. I avoid areas where there are pet stores or grooming salons, because likely there's a higher traffic of triggering dog stimulus and stuff like that. So really, it's all about this passive management is all about setting yourself and your dog up for success before the walk has even started, picking those times carefully, managing your time, managing their bladder and their bowels so that you're their need to go during the off-peak times. These sorts of things so helpful, and getting in a good routine with your dog that works. Another form of passive management is to take your dog somewhere calmer for their walks, if possible, right? I know this is not always possible, but I know I have some clients who are lucky enough to be able to drive their dogs to quieter locations. So lots of our clients in New York will go from Manhattan to Brooklyn or to Queens or somewhere like that to take their dogs on longer walks. And that's a form of passive management. You're making sure that the environment is going to set them up for success. And then the last kind of point that I have here is to make sure your dog's internal state is set up for success. And an example of this is if I walk my puppy in the evening around 7 to 8 p.m. after a long day of napping, he's going to be pretty much a psycho. We're hitting witching hour, you know, that part of the day where puppies and especially young dogs tend to get a big burst of uncontrollable energy. He has been sleeping for 4 or 5 hours prior to that, so he's going to be raring to go. For some dogs that might mean, you know, playing with them before they go on their walk, or trying to meet their needs for running and biting and these sorts of things before they go outside on their walk, or just considering their internal state. You know, oh, I just got 5 deliveries back to back. I'm not going to walk my dog in the hour after that because they're all jazzed up from the doorbell going off over and over again. These are things to be considering, and this is all under the heading, I'd say, of passive management. You're not actually telling them to do anything. You're not instructing them. You're not feeding them any treats. You're just setting them up for success. Oh, Sniff Spots, great resource for those in America, which is an app that you can rent out secure, like little dog parks, private little fields, gardens, to give your dog the best chance of success on and meet their needs, right? To be out in the world and explore. What a great recommendation there in the chat from someone, so thank you for that. So people are often like, okay, so should I do one of these? I'm like, no, you should do all of these. You're going to be doing all of these, and very quickly it will become second nature. It will become habit, I promise. But I want you to start thinking about your neighborhood, maybe even go on a walk without your dog, right? Scout out the areas. Is there like a really tricky corner that you always get stuck on and surprised by a trigger? Really start to think about that, and see how you can set yourself and your dogs up for success as much as possible. So that's our passive management. And now I'm going to give you, I think it's 5 tools, 5 active management tools. Now, before I go into these one by one, in our courses, in our private coaching services, we spend weeks and weeks and weeks working on active management. It's not something that happens overnight. And when I show you these tools, I'm not going to be giving you step-by-step instructions to teach each of these things. I want to just show you the sort of things that we're talking about. Maybe you've tried 1 or 2 of them. Maybe you'll just do more research into some of these, but I want to set expectations. I'm not going to be able to teach you how to train all of these things and perfect all of these skills from start to finish. I do want to show you what sort of skills we're talking about when we're discussing active management, and maybe inspire you to pick up 1 or 2 of these or research more into some of these. And some of these we do have like tutorials and stuff on our Instagram, so you can check that out a little bit more if you're interested. So yeah, so let me just talk about active management very quickly, define that very fast. So rather than passive stuff, which is quite hands-off, active management, I'm referring to specific tools to help navigate the challenging environment and the triggers that your dog experiences. We need to rehearse these very frequently before we even get outside. We need to rehearse these away from the triggers to start off with, and we need to maintain these over the course of your dog's treatment for their behavior, unwanted and maladaptive behaviors. So it's not sort of something that you can just start doing around triggers and expect to work. It's something that we have to practice with them. It's a tool. The tools that we practice with them. The first one here is leash handling, and you guys get a treat today. You get to watch a very dorky video of me doing sort of demonstrating some leash handling with my stuffed dog. He's a fake dog, he's not real. He's called Bagheera, and I'm going to show you here the leash handling techniques, very, very briefly, an overview of some of things that we will teach our clients. So this is how we will teach our clients to keep maximum control over the leash. And you'll see that we don't just hold the end of it and let it all wave around and drag around. We have 2 points of contact on the leash, an anchor hand and a control hand. The anchor hand is the hand furthest away from your dog. The control hand is the hand closest to your dog. So if you're watching this video, on the right-hand side of the screen, that's my anchor hand. On the left-hand side of the screen, that's my control hand. The control hand is closer to the dog. And you'll see that I always keep my treat pouch on the same side as the dog. And I'm standing in this very silly, look at my face, in this very silly position here, with one hand being the control hand, holding the end of the leash, and one hand being the anchor hand, holding the end of the leash, and the control hand somewhere in the middle, right? I always have 2 hands on the leash unless I am feeding my dog. And this is where it gets really dorky. You get to watch me do some little fake walking. We're walking. And then maybe I will give my dog a cookie by releasing the control hand, and I pick it back up again. I really want to see, if you do take one thing away from this webinar, 2 hands on your leash when you're walking your dog, keep them close to you. I don't want them 6 feet in front of you, because it's so much harder to avoid reactions that way, and they can see so much more than you. If they're close to you, you both have the same sight lines, you can both be exposed to the same triggers, and you know that if they do lunge, you've got them. They're only going to be going 1 or 2 feet away from you. So keep your hands close to your body. I don't want to see anyone walking around with their hands stretched out in front of them like a zombie, right? Your hands are close to your center of gravity. You've got 2 hands on the leash. There are many more things I could teach you about leash handling. I believe leash skills are an art form, and I really like to teach folks how to handle their leash artfully, but basic level, 2 hands, anchor hand, control hand, and keep your hands close to your body. So leash handling, obviously starting here with these basic skills and going up to quite complex skills, are our first active management technique. I'd be interested in hearing if anyone's a little bit surprised by this. Has anyone, maybe you've been not doing this and got into some trouble before? Let me know in the chat if that's what you've experienced, because it's so commonly the case. Yeah, so definitely be thinking about how you're holding your leash. Those nice short flat leashes, no flexi leashes, please. Second active management skill here I have is a find it. Now, this is a video of Momo, one of the clients from our Feisty Fido virtual course, which is a digital program for reactive dogs. And in this video, it's very short, but you'll see Momo getting quite fixated on something. This was actually our intake video. All that we'd taught them so far was the find it cue. So you'll see how they use the find it cue to move Momo away from a trigger he's fixating on. So let's have a little look at this. I'll probably play it twice for you so you can have a proper look.
Calm down yet? Oh, leave it normal. Yes, good boy. Good job, find it. Yes, find it. Good boy.
So let's watch that again. Let's watch it without the sound for a second. And find it essentially means there's food on the floor. Get your nose down and find it. Really simple, a really simple cue and a really easy way to redirect and help dogs calm down. As you can see here, they're using it with Momo to distract him while that dog walks across the street at a distance. And we're encouraging him to get his nose down and to sniff, which does help with nervous system regulation. So let's see this one more time. His ears are pricked, he's licking his lips, he's moving his feet quite quickly, and he does a little lunge here. Very quickly, he's able to redirect to mom, and she immediately starts cueing find it, calm down. It's kind of like if you have a dysregulated toddler and you say, okay, take a deep breath, relax, you got this, right? It's a way of redirecting. Ideally, we would have done those find its before he even saw that trigger, but either way, you can definitely use it in a variety of different contexts to distract, to move away. You can kind of treat trail the dog away from triggers and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely lots of things that you can use this cue for. If I could teach every dog in the world one thing, it would be this. Honestly, I think it's so helpful in such a variety of contexts. And again, to manage the problem, to manage the behavior, right? While we work on behavior modification. So we'll teach them find it. We'll teach the humans how to hold a leash, how to manage their dog physically. We'll teach the dogs that when we say this cue, you should look down, find that cookie as a way of managing them in those, oh, I don't know if I can swear, oh crap moments. So there are skills here for both the humans and the dogs. I just have a few more that I want to go through and then we'll take some questions. This one is probably one of my favorites. It's a combo move. That's what I call it. Anyway, video game lovers out there, it's a combo move. We're doing two things. We're doing an arc by and a block, a visual block. So this particular tool really hones in on the fact that dogs are very sensitive to spatial pressure. Have any of you ever noticed these like thin sidewalks that we have in the city can really exacerbate reactive behaviors, especially when walking nose to nose directly by triggers? I think that especially during the behavior change process, we cannot expect our dogs to be able to walk right by these triggers. So in this video here, you can see a mother with a pushchair, stroller. Now, Ash, my teenager, would not have been able to handle walking straight by this person and their kid on a sidewalk that's very thin. So it's not the best video, but hopefully you'll be able to see that I've arced off the sidewalk, and that's why we call it an arc by, because rather than walking directly towards the trigger, we've arced off to the side, and I've blocked his vision. I've blocked the spatial pressure with the cars. So I've arced by to break up that nose-to-nose greeting, and I've blocked his access to the trigger using these cars. And you can see he's interested, but able to handle it much, much better than he would have done had I not stepped off the road. So we're arcing by the trigger, and then he's able to go and I think sniff this tree at the end and go, I'm going to have a little sniff as the trigger walks away. And I'm sure many of you have experienced a trigger walking away much easier than a trigger approaching, right? So let's just see that one more time. We've come off the sidewalk. We've gone into the center of the road. We've created a visual barrier, a block with the cars. You can use lampposts, trees, other people, yourself in a pinch, put yourself in between the dog and the trigger, whatever you need to do to kind of break up that sight line. And now the trigger's walking away, we can go back to the sidewalk and continue with our walk. Yeah, really, really useful combo move here. There are just two more, and then I'm going to take a bunch of questions from folks. I just want to show off this stuff, really. Flight training involves teaching dogs to change direction very quickly. Sometimes they call it a U-turn or a let's go cue. So here's an example of me practicing my flight training with Ash. I'm imagining that a trigger popped out of a bush all of a sudden, and I'm practicing what it would look like if I needed to get him back to me really quickly. So let's have a little look at this. Good. Good boy. Okay, let's go. One more time, just because it's very pretty. See that immediate turn back to me, the quick pivot on his heels, that is a trained behavior. And it's great for those like, oh crap moments when you're surprised by a trigger. So useful, something that obviously takes a lot of rehearsal with distraction, but necessary. And I have one last one here, which is probably the hardest one of all. And it is, what are you gonna say? What are you gonna say when someone tries to touch your dog, or when someone's bringing their dog up to yours to greet them and they're unable to handle that, or there's a kid approaching you and your dog on leash? This is often the hardest part for lots of my guardians, and I literally have people practice in front of me. I will get their roommates' spouses out and I will have them practice this with me, because it is hard to be firm. When approached by a trigger that your dog can't handle, I counsel folks to not be like, don't be tentative. Oh, no, thank you. Actually, not today. We're actually doing some training, so we're not able to. No, that's not going to work. I'm so sorry. Especially if you live somewhere like a major city like New York. You know, we have New Yorkers in New York who maybe don't take subtlety as well. And sometimes we need to be firm and certain with people. So some of my favorite scripts, even if they're not true, I use them anyway. They're sick. Please don't let your dog come near them. They're really sick. It's contagious. They have arthritis. They're in pain. Please get your dog away. No, you can't touch them. They have an infection right now. They're not feeling very well. People will run a mile. It's great. That's a good one. Or you can say they bite. People will move away very frequently if you say that. We can't say hi now. No, thank you. We can't say hi now. And this hand, yeah, this hand is really helpful. Use this because people will stop. But if you go, oh, no, thank you, I'm all right, actually, maybe not today, that often doesn't get the result we want from my experience. So really, have a little look down here. Maybe you want to use the sick line. That tends to be socially acceptable. People get that one. Maybe you don't care. No, they bite, you know, they're going to bite you. Don't come close, whatever you want to use. But I really recommend that you have a prepared script in your head about what you're going to say, because so frequently in the moment, we cannot make that good decision. So I really want you to take this to really advocate for your dog and be firm with people about what works and what doesn't work, what they're able to handle and what they're not able to handle. And I'm really quite I'm really firm with my clients about this, that you need to be prepared. What you're going to say to that person who's trying to reach to pet your dog, that's going to get them to hear your message, that your dog really doesn't want to be interacted with right now, and that they hear it quickly, really fast, because you often only have a few seconds. All right, I'm finishing up. Sorry, as always, I went a little bit over. If anyone wants to learn more, please head to our Instagram. That's where we have loads of free content, and we'll hopefully be able to give you these slides. I can chat to Miranda about that. But if you're interested in learning more in coaching, we have a specific program called Feisty Fido, which is all about reactivity, hypersocial dogs, dysregulation, and it really focuses on environments and walking. So do check it out. Here is our information. If you want to see a little bit more about what we do, you can follow us on Instagram, or to go check out our website, where just like the amazing Every Dog does, we have lots of webinars and stuff there for free to go and have a look at. So it was lovely to chat with you guys. I think we'll probably do some questions if Miranda's got some of those ready. Maybe I'll stop my share and we can just be big faces for a while.
Awesome. So much information. Thank you so much for that. We do definitely have some questions. If you didn't already put them in the chat, please do that now. One of the first questions we got a couple of times was, what do you do if you have multiple dogs or maybe multiple reactive dogs, or you're trying to walk several at a time? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, it's a tough one. For me, in an ideal world, we'd walk them separately. I know that can be labor intensive, but so is walking two reactive dogs at the same time, I have to say, especially if one triggers the other, which is so often the case. I've never really seen a case where that isn't what's going on. So if we have one dog that's going to trigger the other one, very, very frequently we'll recommend walking them separately. A small percentage of cases I have where we're dealing with multiple dogs, reactivity and separation anxiety often involve a lot of passive management, you know, driving, going to places where it's really quiet. But yeah, I would definitely recommend walking them separately, especially if they're big. There are some ways to get around that, but very frequently there are no ways to get around that, and you really do have to just take the extra time. I walk my two dogs separately. It's basically a full-time job, but it's really shown that their behaviors improved so much faster because of that. Yeah, great question.
Awesome. We had another question about whether you prefer which side of the body you want your dog to be on, especially for things like the arc maneuver and things like that.
Good questions. In general, I put my dog on either side. I like to practice on both sides because I don't want to be tethered to just being on one side. I want to be able to switch them around if there's a trigger oncoming in a certain direction. And the side that I will choose is the side furthest away from the trigger, usually in most cases. So I personally don't really recommend only having one side that the dog walks on. I think that's restrictive, unnecessarily restrictive. I do want them to be relatively close, especially in a intense environment that's unpredictable. But I actually like both sides and being able to use both sides. And I often practice switching sides with my dogs as well, so that I can easily move them to another side if I want to.
Someone else mentioned that different trainers recommend different lengths of leash. So it could be a 4 or a 6 foot leash. Some people like the 10 foot or 20 foot leashes. Any thoughts there?
Yeah. I mean, I love long leashes. I use long leashes all the time for those pleasure walks, those decompression walks, those walks that are about the dog exploring a safe environment, right? But if you have a dog that's going to be lunging and barking, and you in an urban environment which is quite cramped, you absolutely, from my experience anyway, are not going to be able to get away with a 10-foot leash, because your dog's going to be well out in front of you, likely getting into lots of trouble before you have a chance to even intervene. I usually go for between 4 to 6 feet, usually 6 feet, but if I'm walking a giant, really big bully breed that's reactive and I'm 5'4" and not very muscly, I might use 2 4-foot leashes because I don't want that dog very far from me at all. But I will just double down again and say that if you are being that restrictive with your dog, we need to give them outlets where they are able to move freely, right? But just that's not managed walking, is it? That's unmanaged walking. You're able to do whatever you want, go nuts, right? But when we're managing, we need to manage, and sometimes we need to micromanage. So depending on how sort of sensitive your dog is, and depending on your environment, you will want to be adjusting for that. The longer the leash, the more chance they have to gain momentum in a lunge, right? So if you have a 10-foot leash and a 100-pound dog, you're going to be on the floor by the time it hits the end of that leash. If you have a big dog, sometimes a smaller leash will be necessary. So yeah, it does depend, unfortunately, but hopefully that gives you an idea of what to think about.
Awesome. So what is your response when someone says, "It's okay, my dog is friendly"?
Yes, I mean, it happens all the time. It happened to me just the other day. Honestly, there's not much you can do in those moments. I have to be real from my experience. If they say, "Okay, my dog is friendly," that's usually when I'll bring in that they're sick, they're not very well, please move your dog away. I don't want your dog interacting with them. But listen, you are not going to be able to be 100% successful in this. It's not possible. And I think that's really worth mentioning. I used to get really emotional about it. It really upset me at the beginning. And after many, many years, I've really learned to just deep breathe through it. If my dog is freaking out, okay, he's freaking out. It's not going to help if I freak out too. But I do recommend, if you're in that situation frequently, speak to a trainer who can help you kind of work on maybe skills with a citronella spray, using that pop-up umbrella, having 2 people walk your dog so that one person can intervene if there are off-leash dogs approaching. But unfortunately, I don't have a quick magic fix for that. There really is very little that we can be doing. And sometimes we just have to take deep breaths and go, yep, this sucks. It's happening. We can get through it. It'll be fine. And if that is the case, we might be increasing muzzles, distance increasing gear, that kind of equipment to make sure that, you know, if it's going to happen, we have to prepare for it, right? And likely in some scenarios it is going to happen. So yeah, we'll just be prepared and acknowledge that that is a thing, and it sucks. And I'm so sorry. It's probably happened to everyone here, I'm sure. But yeah, we're all doing a great job, even if it has happened. I think that's important to remind ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, is it better to have your leash clipped to the front or back of the harness?
Great question. I can just talk you through the pros and cons because I don't think there's one answer here. Clipping the leash to the front can inhibit movement. It can cause torque in the joints. It can kind of pull the body back towards you, which is a little bit less comfortable and less good for their gait and the way that they're moving. However, if you are 100 pounds and you have a 100-pound dog, I might recommend that you clip the leash to the front and also to a collar, right? 2 leashes. So we're always balancing control and safety, and then the health and well-being and comfort of that animal. A back clip harness, more comfortable, but often easier for an animal to pull you over. And if you have a really big, unpredictable dog in an urban environment, you know, we're going to have to do the cost benefit analysis and figure out what's best. But when I am thinking about clipping to the front, I'm always thinking about, is this dog healthy? Does it have good muscle density? Is it strong enough that it's safe and kind to do this? Because there are definitely lots of dogs out there who have injuries, who maybe have chronic pain or arthritis or dysplasia or something like that. And all of this affects that decision. So more control on the front, but less comfortable, less control on the back, but safer and more comfortable for the dog. And that's really an individual choice that I can't make for a dog in this context anyway.
Yep. We got a couple of similar questions about what to do if my dog is not interested in food when outside, or at least not interested when they see another dog or when they're having that moment.
Yeah, so normal to get this question. And I think there are a few different answers. If your dog isn't interested in food, don't offer that food. There's no point. And I don't want to devalue it by pairing it with an uncomfortable scenario over and over again. Sometimes I see people, you know, trying to push food into their dog's mouths in a stressed moment, and that's a very quick way to make your dog really not want to eat that food ever. So definitely, just if it's not going to work, don't use it. Rely on your equipment, use your leash, use your physical strength, make sure you're holding that leash properly, and get them the flip out of there. Give them the distance that they need, and then use the food if you can to help them calm down. That being said, if you're seeing a dog that is so overwhelmed by their environment that they are unable to eat food, whereas they normally are really into food, that's a serious mental health condition that we're dealing with for that animal. It's a serious welfare issue that we're dealing with for that animal. And a large majority of my clients are in exactly that position, and they're in Manhattan or they're in central London. And in those cases, we are definitely not at the end of the road, but we will need to speak to a vet. You know, there are lots of other things that we can do, integrative things we can do to decrease stress, build confidence. But in many, many cases, from my experience, those dogs require medical intervention alongside behavioral intervention. It's, you know, kind of like someone who has a panic attack the minute they leave the home. That's therapy is great, but we also might want to go to our doctor to make sure that their physical body is okay. You know, make sure that everything that they're dealing with is they're going to be able to recover and have a healthy, literally healthy organs, a healthy brain chemistry, this kind of stuff. So it's a tough one, but if we're seeing such chronic, overwhelming stress that means that they're unable to think and they panic immediately, we might have to kind of raise the level of intervention to medical as well to make sure that we're getting them in a place where they can then be receptive to training and therapy. But that's a conversation that will happen with a medical professional for sure.
Yep. So what if we have dogs who might redirect onto the other dog when they're having a reaction?
Yeah, that's what muzzles are for. I mean, obviously, if there's any risk of bite, if there's any risk of even snapping, because that can escalate very quickly, I will quite quickly put a muzzle on that dog, because like we've talked about and we've seen, stuff happens. You cannot account for every scenario. I was walking on a major street in London and an off-leash Jack Russell ran up to me. I'm like, this is the middle of zone 2 London. What are you doing? Like, you're a ratting dog. Why are you loose in the city? Right. And the more likely that is to happen, the more we elevate and escalate our management, passive and active interventions to make sure that all the animals are safe, right? Same thing if we are going to be in a place with lots of children, right? Or something like that. We will likely be escalating the safety procedures that we put in place. Of course, a conditioned muzzle, a muzzle that the dog learns to wear comfortably and accept without elevated stress. But definitely, if there's any chance of redirection, if there's any chance of biting, we need to be, that's non-negotiable for me as a consultant.
Yeah. And with this being a dog who's redirecting onto the other dog that you're walking, this is another one where we have a welfare concern and a really good reason to not walk the dogs together.
Oh, I assume
yep.
they were.
Sorry.
I assume they were redirecting onto the trigger dog. But yes, if you're walking 2 dogs together and they're redirecting, 100% walk those dogs separately. Absolutely not fair for that second dog to be the punching bag essentially. Yep. For the dog that's struggling, and a very quick way to really create 2 problems. Right, we're going to have more problems than we had at the beginning, because now this second dog's going to potentially become reactive or aggressive towards the sibling dog. So yeah, definitely walking separately, definitely muzzles, all sorts of things like that will be going on for this case.
I think this ties on to the previous question about veterinary behavior. But we've been using passive and active management, and our dog often has a couple of reactions per walk. We talked about the bank account thing. Can we expect to see her behavior improving through behavior modification despite having those couple of reactions each walk?
I mean, I can't give you an answer because I don't know enough details for that specific question. However, in general, from my experience, if we have a dog that needs to go out multiple times to use the bathroom and they're reacting multiple times on every walk, it's really hard to change behavior unless we get those reactions down. So in this case, if I often get this, we have amazing clients, right? They come to me and they say, we've watched all the YouTube videos, we're doing all the active and passive management, and still we're making no progress. Absolutely, like Miranda said, that is a case where we need to start thinking about medical intervention as well. It's, like if you were doing all your therapy and yoga and meditation and eating well, and you still had a raging anxiety condition that meant you were having multiple out of control moments a day, we would be immediately going, okay, you need to go to talk to your general practitioner or a psychiatrist about this, right? And it's the exact same thing for our animals. So first of all, amazing job that you're doing all of these things, and it might be that you need to speak to a veterinarian and definitely get a trainer's eye on it if possible, because sometimes people say to me, I've been doing all these things, and then I have a look and I'm like, ooh, we've been doing them slightly wrong. Just everything slightly wrong, and if we change everything a little bit, that might kind of accumulate. But yeah, it does sound a little bit like maybe a vet might be an appropriate port of call for a dog like that.
What management technique do you recommend for blind spots in an urban environment where you may not know if there's a trigger at the turn?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, let's think about where your dog is. We want your dog on the outside of the blind spot. So say you're approaching a corner that's going to go right. You don't want your dog on the inside of that turn, right? Because they're going to be the closest to the trigger. So I usually take a really wide arc around that blind spot, go as far as I can to create a wide arc. And I put my dog on the outside, and often I proactively do find it on the way around the corner, so that the dog is already engaged in something while I have a little peek around. And then if there's something there, let's go quick, off we go. And if it's clear, think about like army people when they're like, wait, okay, go. Like it's literally like that. Like I'm like, find it while I'm looking around the corner. And if it's clear, I'll go, clear, let's go. And we both go together and be silly with it, pretend you're playing a game, with your dog. But yeah, that's a really, really good question. So take the corner wide, put your dog on the outside, and proactively manage on the way around whilst you're looking to see if there's anyone there. That's a really good question. Yeah.
The next question is about CBD and Prozac for dogs. I'm just going to step in real quick. So as trainers, we are never going to make recommendations about specific medications. What I can tell you is that on our page, everydogaustin.org/resources, there's a whole section about veterinary behavior and veterinary medications for behavior. There are several resources on there, including some webinars from folks like Dr. Leslie Sin about CBD and what it can and can't do, and maybe when we should or shouldn't use it, as well as a whole bunch of different medications. Just keep in mind when we often say doggy Prozac, that might be a term for a whole bunch of different medications, not necessarily just Prozac. But like Karishma said, sometimes that can be a really beneficial tool for certain dogs, but it's something where we always need to get a veterinarian to be part of that. And if possible, a veterinary behaviorist, because they're the ones who focus on that. So one other question, any advice for when the dogs are so overwhelmed or fearful that they're more of the, what I call the pancake dogs, the ones who just freeze on the floor?
Babies, yeah. I mean, we're seeing one of the panic responses, right? So we've got like fight, flight, freeze, fawn. We're seeing that freeze response from your dog. And what I'm hearing is that when they go outside, it sounds like they immediately enter that panic state and they do the pancaking, they do the panicking. Again, likely they're not going to take food. Likely you're not going to be able to say, let's go and have them follow you or find them away from that situation. I would usually just use my leash in that moment to give them distance from that thing, even if it means that I'm quite forcefully moving them away, because from my experience, it's better to get them out of that situation than to leave them there panicking. But again, any case where we're seeing a dog go so over its panic point into that panic response, whether it's fighting, whether it's trying to run away, whether it's freezing, whether it's fawning and jumping on you and licking and mouthing, whatever it is that behavior is, if it is so uncontrollable that they're unable to eat, unable to respond, and it's happening even when you're trying to do all of this passive and active management, that really is a sign that we need to look more integratively, and like a veterinarian or a veterinary behaviorist would definitely be appropriate for that dog, especially if you're trying already with all of these different things and none of these tools are helping them because they go so quickly into that panic state. But again, distance is your friend, and I would call myself a reinforcement-based trainer. I'm a non-violent trainer, but I'm forceful when I need to be, because sometimes they need you to make that decision for them. It's kind of like when your friend, like Steve, is drunk in a club at 3 a.m. and he tries to fight the bouncer. I'm not going to be like, Steve, come on, mate, let's not. I'm like, Steve, get the hell out of here. I'm grabbing Steve. I'm moving him out. I'm taking him to McDonald's. I'm getting him a burger and a milkshake. Sit down. Stop being like that. You're the worst, Steve. Come on. You know, like there's a time for force. Kind force, ethical force. We're not yanking and yelling at them. We're just saying, I see you're panicking. I am making the executive decision to move us out of this situation. And I think people need that sometimes, to be given that, be okay to do that, because we're told never put tension in the leash, never pull a dog. Sometimes you got to put tension in the leash. Sometimes you got to go, we're moving right now. We're getting away from this. And we just do it as kindly as we can and try our best to not put them in those situations, and then seek the medical care that they really need if it's happening over and over again and you can't avoid it.
Absolutely. Okay. And our last question today, will every person who's going to be walking the dog need to use these same techniques?
Ooh, what a good question.
Right?
Really, really good question. I never even thought about that. And yes, yes is the answer. Whenever it comes to dog and changing behavior, we want to be as consistent as possible. We want them to know that they're safe and they're taken care of, and these are the things that are going to happen all the time. Inconsistency is actually really stressful for any animal, right? And if sometimes they're safe and sometimes they're not, sometimes they're being helped and sometimes they're not being helped, we're not going to see behavior going in the way that we want it to. Really think about that bank account analogy, right? You have unwanted maladaptive behaviors and emotions, you have wanted adaptive healthy behaviors and emotions. Whoever's got the end of the leash, money's going in one of these accounts, right? So we need to make sure that everyone is putting money in the appropriate account, and everyone understands that their behavior with the dog on a walk contributes to their overall mental well-being and their behavioral picture. So yeah, definitely, yeah, such a good question. I'm like literally going to write that down so that I make sure that I put that in future future things. Like, yeah, we need to be as consistent as possible. Sometimes that means, you know, us taking our roommates out and teaching them these skills, or, you know, making your parents watch a webinar on why it's so important. And not every dog barks, you know, like it's not normal for dogs to be barking and lunging, and educate the people in your life so that they understand. And then set a boundary with people in your life who don't understand and say, you're not allowed to walk my dog. And yeah, it can be hard, but it's absolutely necessary. So yeah, thank you again for that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much, Karishma. This was lovely, a ton of great information. And for those of you who would like to watch it again, or now have somebody you'd like to maybe share it with, I will get it uploaded to YouTube either today or tomorrow, and I will send everybody the link to it. Along with that link, there will also be information about our upcoming webinars. If you want to check some things out, there will be information about Maddie's Fund, again, who is funding this webinar as part of our Maddie's Fund speaker series. If you'd like to make a donation, again, that makes it so that we can continue to offer these great webinars with lots of different folks from all over the world. And we really appreciate you coming to join. Also, if you want a cool t-shirt, they're really soft. We have t-shirts that say dog training is for everyone. We've got our Pride t-shirts and then our OG t-shirts, but all of them say dog training is for everyone, because it should be. So thank you so much for joining, and we hope to see you soon at some upcoming webinars. And again, Karishma, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for organizing this. It's been great. And thanks everyone for joining.
All right. Enjoy your Saturday. Bye.